Hello, everyone, and welcome to another weekly walk. Happy Wednesday. Thank you for joining us for another weekly walk. Today is, of course, Wednesday, November 22nd. My name is Carla, and today on our weekly walk, we'll be taking a look at dining in Central Park. And it's perfect timing for any of those of you who are celebrating Thanksgiving. Many of us have food and recipes on the mind. I know I do. And so we'll be talking about food and some eating options that have been available historically in the park. Before we get started, of course, just a quick reminder of our Zoom tools that we have that we can use. So please feel free to use the chat feature to say hello and add comments. As always, let's keep our comments nice and positive and welcoming and related to the content. But we'd love to hear from you. If you have a question, please use the Q&A feature, and my colleague Jose will be on the back end to answer any questions you may have and to share some links for some tours we're going to mention today. And also remember that you can use you can turn on the closed captioning feature as well. Now, our mission here, as always, at the Central Park Conservancy is to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. Now, on our walk today, we are going to take a little walk starting at West 67th Street, and then we'll head kind of northeast across Sheep Meadow, a quick look at the mall, at Bethesda Terrace, and then a look at the area we now call Rumsey Playfield. So here we are at the West 67th Street entrance. And when we look to our left, we can see that things are looking just a little bit different right now. They're already gearing up for the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. If you have ever attended this parade, feel free to let us know in the comments. I know I have not. I have attended the filling of the balloons before, but I've never actually attended the parade. It's perhaps too big of crowd for me and too early of a start, but it can be beautiful. It's a really awesome tradition here in New York City that is right on the perimeter of Central Park. But turning to our entrance, we can see that here at 67th Street, we are entering at the entrance to Tavern on the Green as well, which is going to be one of the dining stops that we talk about. But as soon as we enter, we are immediately greeted by this very sunny and happy group of volunteers who were there helping to clean up some litter in the area and perhaps rake up some leaves as well. And they were taking a quick little snack break themselves, perfectly themed for our talk about dining, and they were refueling before they continued some of their work, but enjoying some of this fall sun. So thank you to our volunteers. You're looking good out there. And then as we turn to our right, here is, of course, the classic Tavern on the Green. And it looks like they've already geared up for the colder months with this sort of indoor tent as you first enter. And here we see the classic sheep logo. Now, many of you already know some of the history of Tavern on the Green, that it started out as a place to hold the sheep who used to graze on Sheep Meadow. It was a building beautifully designed by Jacob Ray Mould, the assistant to Central Park's co-designer, Calvert Box. And that's why we have, of course, these sheep on the logo. But when Parks Commissioner Robert Moses came in the 1930s, he kicked the sheep out of the park, out of Central Park, initially to Prospect Park. Now, luckily, Robert Moses didn't tear down this gorgeous building. Instead, he reimagined it as a restaurant. Now, it has gone through many iterations since it was reimagined in the 30s as a restaurant. Here is a very grainy, odd picture of Tavern on the Green with a different looking awning. This was taken in the 1950s, not too long after Robert Moses first opened it as a restaurant. But many of sort of the imagery that many of us think of with Tavern on the Green, ways that we've seen it depicted in many movies and other things, probably harkens back to the time of Warner Leroy, pictured here. In 1976, Warner LeRoy purchased Tavern on the Green. Now, as you may be able to tell from his gold sequined suit jacket here, he was raised in Hollywood. He was literally and figuratively a child of Hollywood, as his mother was one of the Warners of the Warner Brothers, and his father was a film producer producing a little film you may have heard of called Wizard of Oz. And Warner LeRoy himself actually produced plays on Broadway before he turned his flair for the dramatic to the restaurant business. Now, he earlier had a location known as Maxwell's Plum, and then he took over Tavern on the Green in 1974. And he financed pretty extensive, intensive renovations of this space. And this included the building of the Crystal Room, which has been featured in many, many films. But some people found his excessive use of chandeliers and murals and twinkle lights and all kinds of things to sort of be perhaps a bit tacky. But for many years, Tavern on the Green was absolutely a symbol of the wealth and decadence of New York City. And it was featured in a number of films, as I mentioned, some of those being Beaches, Ghostbusters, the movie Wall Street, Arthur II, Mr. Popper's Penguins, many, many other movies. If you're curious to learn more of the movies that include a scene of Tavern on the Green, where they use Tavern on the Green as a filming location, and to learn other spots in Central Park that have been included in films, you can attend our winter movies tour. You may have been familiar with our summer movies tour. There have been so many movies filmed in Central Park that we actually split it up into two tours, warmer month movies and colder month movies. So Jose will drop a link in the chat so you can learn more about our winter movies tour and hear more about some of these film connections to Central Park beyond Warner LeRoy. And as we make our way around Tavern on the Green, we can see some employees there hanging some of the twinkle lights, which of course Tavern on the Green is known for. And also, in the distance there, sort of in the upper center, you can see a very interesting looking building there. That is 55 Central Park West, or perhaps you've heard of it as the Shandor Building. But this was also known as Spook Central for tenants Dana Barrett and Louis Tully from Ghostbusters, of course. So to learn more, definitely attend the winter movies tour. Let's continue on our way. And as we make our way around Tavern on the Green, we notice this bench, one of our adopted benches, and it says, Harry, she had the rack of lamb 1987. Now, I have to admit that I did a fair amount of research. I could not figure out what this came from. I thought it was from When Harry Met Sally. But that movie is from 2 years later. And of course, she didn't have the rack of lamb, as we may be familiar with. So I'm not sure. If you happen to know what this plaque has to do with, then please let us know in the comments. I guess that perhaps Harry had proposed to someone and the woman he proposed to had the rack of lamb. Perhaps that inspired her to say yes to the proposal. That was my guess, but I'd love to hear other thoughts or if folks know exactly what this refers to. But let's continue on our way. And we can see a little glimpse of, it's not quite like the Crystal Room, but sort of the modern iteration of that. A little bit more understated and modern looking. And as we get prepared to cross over to the meadow, we see one more reminder so that we don't forget of Warner LeRoy's contribution to this space and our kind of understanding and imagination of what Tavern on the Green could look like. But let's keep moving. And we're going to cross now. Across the street, we see a brilliant yellow ginkgo. And also we see a more affordable way to dine in the park. This is one of the many food vendor carts that are available in the park. And this is, of course, always one dining option. It looks like this person has some pretzels on hand and probably a little bit too chilly for ice cream at this point. I'm not really into soft pretzels, so we're going to continue moving and take a nice look at Sheep Meadow. Now, Sheep Meadow is a perfect picnic location. I can personally attest to this myself. I've had many, many picnics out on Sheep Meadow. But whether these folks who are out enjoying some of this sun on Sheep Meadow, whether they brought a picnic lunch or not, they are taking in a lot of vitamin D by soaking in this fall sun. Now, continuing on our way, we'll follow these folks out of Sheep Meadow and take one last glimpse across this beautiful view of the meadow on a fall day. And as soon as we leave Sheep Meadow, we immediately encounter this structure here. Now, we still refer to this building usually by its original name, Mineral Springs. Of course, now it's operated at the current time by Le Pont Quotidien. I apologize to any French speakers if I've really butchered that pronunciation. And on the outside of the building, we see a little mini artsy depiction to give us an idea of what is on offer at this eating establishment. And I'm just curious, do you think that back in the 19th century, when they created Mineral Springs originally, do you think they had matcha lattes and avocado toast on the menu? Probably not. The original menu was a little bit more like something like this. So the original Mineral Springs was constructed in 1867, and it was constructed at the recommendation of physicians who thought that providing fresh, cool mineral water would be a really important addition to the overall healthful experience of being in Central Park, the fresh air and the exercise. And at the time, the magazine Scientific American reported on some of what was on offer at Mineral Springs. And they said the waters are of two kinds. First, the natural mineral waters from all the famous springs at home and abroad. And second, mineral waters prepared artificially and scientifically, thus ensuring a definite chemical combination at all times. That sounds not all that appetizing to me currently, but I guess at the time in the 19th century, a chemical combination was very mouthwatering for folks. Now, here is a photo that gives us a sense of what it looked like inside and how those waters were served. And here we have a beautiful view of what the overall structure looked like in the 1860s. And it was described as having a Moorish design influence in some of the shapes and structures, arches. Now, this is what the front of the building looks like today. The current structure that we see was built in the 1950s. And they do currently have mineral water on offer here, but we've already been burning quite a few calories, so we're going to taste a croissant instead. And we'll take one glance back at Sheep Meadow. I can never get enough of this view, but let's keep moving. This is on our right. And we'll make our way down this path on the north end of Sheep Meadow. And as we make our way along, pretty quickly we encounter another kind of dining that has been memorialized in bronze here. We have Eagles and Prey, created by the artist Christophe Fratin. Again, probably a butchering of the French pronunciation of the name. I'm not a huge fan of this particular statue, but I understand everyone needs to eat. However, this is a bit violent for my taste, so let's keep moving on our way. Ah, that's much better. A nice peaceful look at the park with some fall foliage. And glancing at the mall, it's worthwhile to point out that there have been a number of festivals and celebrations that celebrate the harvest and eating in New York. So in 1936, there was a harvest festival held on the mall. And then in 1977, with much less interesting graphics, there was a big food festival held on the mall called the Taste of the Big Apple, or also referred to here as the Big Apple Food and Fun Frolic. It allowed folks to sample the offerings of many local restaurants in the city, which really sounds like a fun idea. However, you can imagine the huge huge crowds this would have drawn, and the strain that it would have been on, that it would have put on the park. And this was before the Central Park Conservancy existed. The Central Park Conservancy, of course, formed in 1980. But in the New York Times, none other than Betsy Barlow Rogers, then Betsy Barlow, spoke up to raise the concern that perhaps, as fun as this festival is, perhaps there would be better locations for something like this with such huge crowds. And in her concern, you can hear that passion that continues to drive the Conservancy in trying to find the right balance between serving the people and the ways they want to use their public park while still protecting the park and preserving the park so that everyone can enjoy this space. Because it is a public park, of course, but it is also, in a way, a piece of art. And this is one of the best places to kind of get that sense of the park as a work of art, the arcade and Bethesda Terrace. And here we see a perfectly framed view of the Angel of the Waters fountain, and overhead the glistening Minton tiles of the arcade. And as we head out back into the sunshine, we turn to our left, and we can see one of the 4 railings that lead down to the terrace, each of which represent one of the 4 seasons, continuing this sort of natural theme throughout all of those rich sandstone carvings. And the fall railing really brings to mind the idea of the fall harvest. And so we see foods like pears and apricots, I'm guessing, grapes, and corn, of course. But these are not the only foods that have been on offer here on the terrace throughout the history of this space. Because in 1966, the Fountain Cafe opened. And according to the New York Times, they reported that the Fountain Cafe opened appropriately with a splash, as it was celebrated, the opening, with Robert Moses, the Parks Commissioner at the time, and Mayor Lindsay were out on rowboats outside, popping open bottles of champagne with a former Miss America there in attendance and using their oars to splash the gathered crowds there for the opening. Sounds a little chilly for this time of year. But at the time, the Fountain Cafe had tables like this that could seat 150 people under these really cool umbrellas, and these tables were donated by none other than George Delacorte, who gave us so many other things in the park, such as Delacorte Theater and the Margarita Delacorte Memorial and Delacorte Clock. And the cafe was open from about 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. and during months that had mild weather. Seems quite late now to have this kind of establishment open. I think most of our cafes today close at about 6 or 7 p.m. about that time. But this was only open for a short amount of time, time-wise, because by the 1970s, it closed due to some fiscal issues, but it was probably for the best because it was not too long after that really extensive, really important restoration work started to be done on the terrace. Now, as we mentioned, it's a little too chilly today. I'm not really thinking I want to get into a boat and splash anyone necessarily. But let's take a closer look at the lake. And here we see these geese who are perhaps wondering where their next dining experience is going to happen, but it is not going to be from any food shared by me, because as we all know, we should not feed the wildlife in the park because it's not healthy for them. It doesn't give them the nutrients that they need. But looking beyond, we see a nice view of yet another dining establishment, Loeb Boathouse. And of course, this version of Loeb Boathouse was built in 1954, and it was built to include more modern facilities than the original wooden sort of Victorian structure had contained, which meant including restrooms and a food concession. But a year-round indoor restaurant actually didn't open until renovations happened in 1983. Now, of course, Loeb Boathouse is a very well-known dining location. It came under new management recently, as you may be aware, And the outdoor cafe has reopened, the boating is back, but the indoor restaurant is still something coming up in the future. So definitely watch out for that. And we'll take one look back at the fountain, which reminds us, of course, with every meal, you perhaps want something to drink. And the angel of the water spout reminds us of that celebration of bringing healing waters to New Yorkers with the completion of the aqueduct, which meant bringing fresh, clean drinking water to New Yorkers. But let's continue on our way because we have one more very important dining establishment to talk about before we end our walk today. So we'll make our way up this little hill and burn some of the calories of that croissant off by going up these steps. And let's just take a quick look back at the beautiful terrace. This is a view of the Bethesda Terrace that I don't always take the time to appreciate or take in. I'm not always looking at it from this perspective. And we'll make our way along the drive and around the bend here. And look up towards this area here. Now, this is an area of the park at about East 72nd Street. And as we make our way into this area, we can't help but notice a robin who is enjoying some hawthorn berries. Everyone is dining in Central Park, no matter the way that they do it. And then we see some stairs that almost seem to lead to nowhere. But in this area, we now know as Rumsey Playfield, there was once a happening nightclub known as the Casino. Now, there was never any gambling in the casino. That is simply sort of an Italian way to say little house, or a fun way to say little house. And originally, this structure was known as the Ladies' Refreshment Salon, but it was later known as the Casino, and that first opened in 1864. But the version of the casino that most folks are usually thinking of is the one that happened after the extensive renovations in the 1920s. Now, at this time, the gap between wealthy and poorer New Yorkers was, kind of wider than ever. This is when Jimmy Walker was the mayor of New York City. And at that time, he turned over the management of the casino to Sidney Solomon, who had a past with managing hotels. And also helping to oversee the establishment was Lawrence Ziegfeld Jr. of the Ziegfeld Follies fame, and also the producer of Showboat, which makes me think of Warner LeRoy and his sort of production and theatrical background, taking over Tavern on the Green. Now, the brick outside of Calvert Vaux's original construction wasn't changed too much as part of those renovations, but Joseph Urban was hired to design the interior of the casino in a more modernist style. Joseph Urban was an Austrian-American architect, and he also was a theatrical and film set designer. So again, we see those ties to film and theater. And 50 years before we have Warner LeRoy's Crystal Room, we have beautiful lobbies like this and chandeliers like this. This was in the ballroom of the casino, and the casino was advertised as the most beautiful and elegant restaurant in the world. And even though this is during Prohibition, somehow they found ways of serving champagne. But even during this time, there was criticism that the casino had simply been renovated and reimagined as a sort of watering hole for Jimmy Walker and some of his cronies and his mistress, Betty Compton. But he protested that he was just trying to do something nice for the people of New York. But of course, the casino was not considered the most affordable of eating establishments. It included some of the staff included a former chef for the Rothschild, so you can imagine the prices. And after the 1929 stock market crash, you can imagine the feeling sort of soured on a place like the casino. In 1930, there was even a raid by federal agents looking for alcohol. And that was witnessed by members of the Astor family, various princesses, and some representatives of the Cuban and Brazilian government. So some dignitaries there to see the raid by federal agents. It wasn't long then before Jimmy Walker was removed from office by FDR on corruption charges. And on May 6, 1936, just 24 hours after he received court permission to tear down the structure, Robert Moses went ahead and did just that, bringing wrecking crews immediately to the site. And so Rumsey Playground was placed here in 1937, but then that was raised as well by the 1980s. Today, we know this site as the place where the Summer Stage concert series happens. And there is no restaurant here today, so we'll simply have to feast our eyes on these beautiful views of the park with the sunshine coming through some of those various colored leaves. And so we have completed our walk, and I don't know about you, even snacking on a croissant, I've worked up an appetite. So I'm ready for some more snacking myself. But we made our way all the way from West 67th Street across that northern path of Sheep Meadow, across the mall, down to the terrace, and over to the area of Rumsey Playfield. And I want to thank all of you for joining us again for this wonderful weekly walk and talking about some of the dining options that have been available in Central Park throughout the park's history that adds to our experience and our enjoyment of the space. I hope if you are someone who celebrates Thanksgiving that you have a wonderful time with your family and you have safe travels getting to wherever you need to be, and you're very successful in your Thanksgiving cooking if you're doing that. And if you need something to do, sorry, this is Thursday, but should say Friday. If you need something to do on Friday, we would love to see you in the park. We have a tour of Seneca Village led by me at 2 p.m. on Friday. I apologize for that confusion there. This is Friday after the day after Thanksgiving. You can join us in the park for a tour of Seneca Village. Thank you very much for joining us. It was a pleasure being with you again this week. We really appreciate all of your support of what we do here at the Central Park Conservancy. So until the next time, thank you and be well, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you, everyone. Take care.